Today, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Daoud Kutab and his brother Jonathan Kutab, both who've had very distinguished careers as commentators on Palestine and Israel, but have different perspectives on the question of one versus two states. Daoud is an award-winning Palestinian journalist. He's the author of State of Palestine Now, and he's argued that the urgent and doable solution now is the creation of an independent state of Palestine. His brother, Jonathan Kutab, is the co-founder of human rights groups like Al-Haq and Nonviolence International. He's the executive director of Friends of Sabeel North America. He also has a book on this subject. His is called Beyond the Two-State Solution. So as you might suspect, he has a different perspective. He's written that two states is no longer feasible. Then I'm going to ask Daoud and Jonathan both to explain their point of view, and maybe a little bit later I'll ask what it's like at family gatherings when these issues come up. So, Daoud, starting with you, what is, in your mind, the argument for why partition into two states is still the right way to think about the most just, peaceful future for Palestine and Israel?
Well, I'm a Palestinian national, and I would like to see Palestinian nationalism succeed. In the previous century, Palestinian nationalism talked about a secular democratic state, but that never worked because the Zionists wanted a state as Jewish as France is French. And so there was a shift in Palestinian national thinking towards the two-state solution, which is basically taking the idea that we have, I don't know how many million people between the river and the sea, and have to either share the land or share the power. And I'm for sharing the land. And I'll explain that shortly because it's a legal issue. International law is very clear about the inadmissibility of taking land by force. So what Israel did in June 5th, 1967 is illegal. International law is very clear on that. The last decision of the Obama administration, UN Security Council 2338, clearly said that the occupied territories, including East Jerusalem, must be part of the Palestinian state. It's also a practical issue. Right now, talking about a one-state solution is a diversion and a distraction. Most countries of the world have accepted and recognized the Palestinian state. So it is the most practical solution. We also have a huge economic disparity between Israel and Palestine. The GDP in Israel is about 54,000 per capita. In Palestine, it's like 3,000. It's also, after October 7th, become emotional because Palestinians and I guess maybe Israelis just can't stand each other. So it's not the right time to set up a one-state solution. However, I'm not against the one-state solution at a later stage. I think once we have rid of the choke on our necks, so once we got rid of this foreign military occupation and resting, taking a breath, we can then negotiate as a state with another state. France and Germany, it's kind of a two-state solution, but they have created under the EU confederation. So I'm not opposed to the concept of one state or any other concept after the Palestinian state. We had a Palestinian leader, Abu Iyad, who said once that we need 5 minutes of a Palestinian state and then we could confederate with Jordan. And we were talking about more of the Arab side. But the idea is we need to be independent first, and that's basically the fulfillment of the right of self-determination. So the idea of Palestinian statehood is practical, it's doable, it's the one agreement that the majority of Israelis and Palestinians, have changed, but basically they still agree to, whereas almost no Israelis agree to the one-state solution, and you can't force that because then otherwise you're talking about a self-determination for whom? For the people. Whereas Palestinians clearly want self-determination in a Palestinian state, and then us or the future generations can realize that it might be better to either confederate or federate it. That's up to them.
Terrific. Jonathan, why do you see things differently?
Actually, my brother and I agree more than we disagree. For many years, I was an advocate for a two-state solution at a time even when it was not the popular position among Palestinians or in the international community. The two-state solution, however, is a pragmatic compromise. It's a compromise that we thought, especially right after 67, was doable, was something that we can live with, Palestinians and Israelis can live with, without challenging the basic presuppositions of their ideologies, whether it's Zionism or Palestinian nationalism. The problem with that solution, it had many problems, obviously, like all compromises. But one of its biggest problems was that it ignored some very basic constituencies and issues. It ignored, for example, Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. It largely ignored the refugee population outside the border. It ignored the settler population, the Jewish population who were settled in that small 22% of Palestine that was to be the Palestinian state. For this compromise to work, actually, the Israelis had to stop settlement activities, basically disband the settlements. Instead, the Zionist movement, the settler movement, the State of Israel has built up, increased the settlements to the point where they scramble the egg so much that it's hard to unscramble it. Even if you keep the major settlement blocks, you still have to uproot at least 100,000 out of the 700,000 Jewish settlers who have settled into that tiny West Bank. A new reality was created that made it impractical, impossible to carry out the two-state solution. I wish it could have been carried out right after 67. Now, when I became convinced that you can no longer have the two-state solution, you had to go back to the drawing boards. And when you go back to the drawing boards, you don't start with the compromise. You start with the initial position. Especially after October 7, we were forced to go back to the drawing board. We were forced to deal with some basic issues that were basically pushed under the rug by the two-state solution. In fact, the two-state solution now, almost all experts agree, is not feasible anymore, is not likely to happen anymore. Instead, it has become an excuse, an alibi, not to deal with some basic issues about the nature of Zionism, the nature of a Jewish state, the nature of Palestinian nationalism, how it can be reconciled with 7 million non-Arabs who are living in Palestine. So you can no longer say Palestine Arabiya, Palestine is Arab, when half the people in it are not Arabs. Similarly, you can no longer claim Israel as a Jewish state when half the people living in it, 7 million, are not Jews. So you really had to go back to the drawing boards. You had to do some creative new thinking. And there are different formulae for reconciling or dealing with these two ideologies, Palestinian nationalism and Jewish Zionism, the idea of a Jewish state. Now, I think it is possible to reconcile the two of them. I think it is possible for people to live together in the same state. I think it is possible to have just about everything that Zionism or Palestinian nationalism promises you, except for exclusivity. You have to learn to live together and share all the land. Now, I agree with Daoud that it's very far-fetched to create this right now. The huge power imbalance that exists. In fact, it makes this whole discussion, if I may say so, almost a luxury. We are living in a situation where there's an ongoing genocide. We must, at a minimum, lift the siege of Gaza. Let people travel in and out freely. At a very basic minimum, you must do that. And those who continue to speak about the two-state solution and about the Palestinian state, at a minimum need to freeze and start rolling back some of the settlement activities which are, in fact, mushrooming all over. Right now in the West Bank, largely under the guise of the ongoing events in Gaza, the settlers are running amok. They're taking more and more land and building more and more, not even building settlements. They're having thugs, they're shepherding settlers are going around literally terrorizing the population and pushing people off of their lands in what little remains that could form the basis for a Palestinian state. So there are immediate tasks that need to be addressed right now, and there are fundamental ideological issues that need to be addressed. And the talk of a two-state solution is often used as an alibi. What would you believe? A former head of AIPAC once told me, when I asked him, what is your proposed solution? Before I finished my sentence, he said, two-state solution. For him, the two-state solution was a nice alibi to do nothing about the ongoing situation.
This has been a free preview of my weekly conversation. If you'd like to hear the rest and support my work, please consider subscribing at peterbeinart.substack.com.